Hey you guys, in this video I'm going to show you how to make your notes on guitar sing using a technique called vibrato. Even if you didn't know it was called vibrato, everybody knows that it sounds cool, so let's get into it. I'll start by showing you guys the 3 popular kinds of vibrato, and then I'll give you some tips on how to use it regardless of which kind you prefer. And the truth is, out of the 3 kinds of vibrato we're going to talk about, 2 of them are used by either beginners or literally Eric Clapton. So we'll start with our first style of vibrato, what I call Eric Clapton style vibrato. I wish I had a more creative name for this style of vibrato, but honestly, Eric Clapton and his disciples are really the only people who you see using this. And the way it works is like this. You'll take any finger, let's say I'm going to do vibrato with my first finger, and let's say I'm going to do it here at the 7th fret of the B string, just for example. What you're going to do is when you're playing the note, you're going to take all of your other fingers off of the fretboard. You're going to kind of lock your finger into this like fretted note shape, this sort of like hook shape, and then you're going to press down on your note and then just move your whole hand up and down, and it should sound like this. That's Eric Clapton style vibrato. You can apply this to any of your fingers. A common finger to be doing vibrato with is your 3rd finger, so we could do it there. The only difference when you're using a finger that's not your first finger is you keep the fingers behind it down. So if I was using my 3rd finger, I would keep all 3 of these fingers down, but again, my remaining fingers would come off the fretboard, and even these, again, these 3 fingers would just be locked into that fretting shape, and I'd be moving my whole arm up and down. As you can tell, this one is a little bit like counterintuitive to do. And like I said, I'm not joking. Eric Clapton is like the only mainstream guy you see doing this style. So we just call it Eric Clapton style. The other kind of like not super popular style is what we call violin style. And that's a vibrato where you move your fingers back and forth. And when I say back and forth, I mean like from the headstock to the bridge, kind of like this. You could do it with any finger. You could do it with your first finger, with your 4th finger, so on and so forth. You can tell I'm not great at those 2 because me, along with everybody else, actually uses the 3rd kind, which is what we call butterfly vibrato. This was kind of popularized by B.B. King, you know, the great blues player, and he was really exaggerated about it. He would do, like, if he was doing vibrato, again, 7th fret on the B string with his first finger, he would take his whole hand, and there would be a ton of movement. These days, players are a little bit more subtle about the movement, but the core principles stay the same. Basically, you're going to take your finger, again, let's just say your first finger here. It's almost like violin vibrato, but instead of moving your finger back and forth between the headstock and the bridge, you're going to move your finger kind of up and down, almost like you're turning a doorknob. That's kind of how I explain it to a lot of my students, is imagine you're doing this, and the rotation is all in your wrist. So in like very slow motion, it would look something like this. And then as you get faster, it starts to look more like you know, any modern player, honestly. Now, the tricky part of butterfly vibrato is this. You know, we talked about the motion of your hand and the twisting of the doorknob thing. It actually can't be perfectly efficient. You can't have just like a perfect like cylinder twist where you're just pivoting on your first finger or whatever finger you're doing vibrato on, and so that all the rotation never makes it to the note. You gotta let some of that rotation bleed into the note. That's what creates the actual movement of the note with the vibrato. And the way I personally achieve that is this. I lock whatever finger I'm using to do the vibrato in place. So when I go to fret the note, again, just like 7th fret on the B string, for example, and I make this fret, now my finger is locked in position. Normally when you're turning a door handle, what you'll notice is, yeah, your fingers actually move a little bit to accommodate the door handle. You can't do that. They've got to be perfectly locked in. And then all the rotational energy from your wrist and from your arm and everything will just sort of bleed into your note, as if it's a mistake, but you're doing it on purpose to make the vibrato happen. Same thing goes if you're doing vibrato with any of your other fingers. So if you're going to do it with my 2nd finger, I'm going to keep the finger behind it down. And now these 2 fingers, they're locked in shape, right? I have locked them. They are not going anywhere. And then the rotational movement just from my arm and my wrist is going to create the vibrato. Same thing with your 3rd finger. Keep all the fingers behind it down, lock them in place, let the rotation create the vibrato. And finally, the same for your 4th finger. Now, one of the ways to kind of get butterfly vibrato under your hand really well is to start off very slow and very exaggerated. So if I was just doing this for the first time, I'd pick a note and I would start moving my hand and I'd just like going really slow, thinking about the motion, okay? And in fact, one of the techniques that I think it works really well for just doing this for the first time, just, again, lock your finger in place and then just focus on touching your pinky here to the bottom of your fretboard and then pointing it toward the floor. Bottom of the fretboard and then pointing it toward the floor. And just do several repetitions of this. And that'll just start to get that rotation down. It'll be kind of mechanical and awkward at first, but eventually you'll be able to get it, you'll start feeling it, it'll pick up more, and you'll start getting some vibrato going on. So there you go, there's the three kinds of vibrato. Eric Clapton style, violin style, and then the kind that I notice most people actually use, which is B.B. King's butterfly style. But again, feel free to use whatever kind you like. And if you're about to click off the video, I encourage you not to, because the truth is, having good versus bad vibrato is one of those things that does stop you from being an advanced player. A dead giveaway that somebody isn't quite as good as they might seem is when they're playing, and then it comes time to do vibrato, and it sounds like weird and jittery and out of place. So here's a couple of tips to prevent that. First of all, if we zoom out for a second, let's remember that vibrato is supposed to make your playing sound like singing. It's an effect that's meant to mimic the human voice. And the reason that's super important is because if you don't follow these rules, that's the thing that makes vibrato sound bad. Vibrato is bad, definitionally, when it sounds not like a human voice, okay? And because we all know what human voices and human singing sounds like so well, that's why it's so easy to spot bad vibrato. So anyway, that's sort of the animating principle, and the first real tip is this, and that's think about vibrato as existing on a spectrum. On one side of the spectrum, you have slow and narrow, and on the other, you have wide and fast. And wherever you fall on that spectrum depends on the intensity of what you're playing at that moment. I know that sounds complicated, so let me explain. Let's say you're taking a pretty mellow guitar solo. Let's say it's like a slow blues thing, and you start with like some really chill opening phrase like this. Notice my vibrato on this note that I'm holding out here is narrow and slow. Let's break those two down, narrow and slow. When I say narrow, what I mean is, you know, you can almost think about vibrato as a tiny little bend. We have a pitch, and we're just bending the string so that it goes up a little bit from that pitch and then returns to pitch. So it's like up and back and up and back and up and back. When I say narrow vibrato, what I mean is that we're deviating from that pitch just a little bit, all right? It's not a huge wild swing. It's just a little bit off the pitch and back, a little bit off and back. So it might sound like this. Again, just to draw the difference, here's what like out of place wide vibrato, where you deviate from the pitch a lot, might sound like. There's a time and a place for that kind of vibrato, and we'll address that in just a second, but for now, just remember, narrow vibrato is best when you're on the one end of the spectrum. The other half of what we were talking about is slow vibrato, and all that means is that your actual individual deviations from pitch are pretty far apart. They're kind of slow. Again, it might sound like this. Vibrato that is, you know, correctly narrow, but maybe too fast might sound something like this. It just sounds a little bit not singing. Like a singer wouldn't do that. That'd be a little, you might tell that the singer is nervous if they accidentally did something like that. It doesn't sound quite right. So that's one end of the spectrum, where your vibrato is narrow and slow. And that's the chill end. Now on the flip side of that is vibrato that is wide and fast. And this might be used in a passage where your playing is meant to be loud and exciting and super fast. Let me give you guys an example. So let's say my guitar solo comes in at like the peak of the song. Like it's super loud, super exciting. So maybe I'll start my solo with like a really exciting phrase that lets everybody know that a real man is on guitar tonight. You know, the kind of man that struggles to grow a beard and is a YouTuber. I'm gonna throw a little dirt on for this phrase. All right, so the note that we're focusing on there is the one with the vibrato, the one that we end the phrase on. I I just played the rest of the phrase to give you, the context of, an upbeat, exciting phrase. When we're on this end of the vibrato spectrum, meaning that our playing is supposed to be intense and exciting, we want our vibrato to be wide and fast. So let's break it down the same way we did before. When we say wide vibrato, what I mean is that our deviation from pitch is going to be bigger instead of before when our deviation from pitch was very small. So instead of doing vibrato that might be narrow like this, we're going to play something that's very wide like this. The other half of that is you want your vibrato to be fast, meaning that each little deviation from pitch should be closer together, or faster, whereas before we were playing it slower. So here's an example of it being fast, and here's an example of it being slow. Again, a slow vibrato works in a different context that we just covered. So hopefully you can see the broad point that I'm making here is that because we want vibrato to mimic a human singing voice, it should be narrow and slow when it's, like a very calm part of the song, and when it's an exciting part of the song, you want it to be wide and fast. But those two parameters always have to be together, and you can be anywhere in between those 2 points. It is a spectrum, depending on the, intensity of what you're playing, but those two variables should always move together. Width and speed should always increase or decrease together. And that just about covers the fundamentals of vibrato. We talked about the 3 kinds of vibrato, and I showed you the guiding principle as well as 2 tips about how to use vibrato no matter which style you personally like. This is a bit of a quicker video, but I've been meaning to do a vibrato deep dive for a while, so I hope you guys like this one. As always, thank you for watching.